This necklace was my daughter's, the businesswoman said when she saw the seamstress done and discovered the truth. Margaret Montgomery held the paper with the address hastily scribbled on it. She had heard about that seamstress through an acquaintance who praised her impeccable work with party dresses. Now, standing in front of the worn wooden door, she took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. The door opened, revealing a woman of about 35, brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail, wearing a greyish-green blouse that had seen better days. But it wasn't the tired face or the thread-stained hands that made Margaret freeze at the entrance. It was the gold necklace around her neck. The air escaped from Margaret's lungs as if someone had punched her in the stomach. That necklace, that heart-shaped pendant with filigree details, she knew every curve of that piece because she herself had commissioned the exclusive design 16 years ago. "Are you all right, ma'am?" asked the seamstress, noticing the visitor's sudden pallor. Margaret couldn't take her eyes off the jewellery. Her hands began to tremble, and she had to steady herself against the doorframe. Where did you get that necklace?" The words came out in a faint voice. The seamstress instinctively brought her hand to her neck, touching the necklace with a protective gesture that Margaret knew well. It was exactly how Abigail used to do it. "It was a gift," replied the woman, frowning slightly. "Why do you ask, ma'am?" Margaret entered without asking permission, her eyes fixed on the jewellery swinging around the seamstress's neck. The workshop was small, crammed with fabrics, mannequins, and an old sewing machine humming softly in a corner. The smell of new fabric mixed with the soft scent of lavender hanging in sachets along the walls. "This necklace," Margaret repeated, her voice now firmer but laden with emotion she could barely contain. "It belonged to my daughter." The seamstress took a step back, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "You must be mistaken, ma'am. This necklace has been mine for years." "I'm not mistaken." Margaret stepped closer, pointing at the pendant. "See this detail here on the edge of the heart? There's a small mark, almost invisible. It looks like a scratch, but it's intentional. I asked the jeweler to make it that way." The seamstress held the pendant between her fingers, examining it. Her eyes widened when she found exactly the mark Margaret had described. "How do you know that?" Her voice came out in an apprehensive whisper. "Because I gave this necklace to my daughter on her 15th birthday." Margaret felt tears burning in her eyes. "And she disappeared 3 months later, 16 years ago." The silence that settled in the small workshop was so dense it seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. The seamstress looked at Margaret with a mixture of fear and confusion, while Margaret struggled against the wave of memories threatening to overwhelm her. "My name is Natalie," said the seamstress finally, her voice cautious. "Natalie Miller, and I swear I don't know anything about your daughter." "Then explain to me how this necklace ended up with you," Margaret demanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions. "This piece is unique. It was custom-made. There is no other like it." Natalie ran her hand over her face, visibly disturbed. "My mother gave me this necklace when I was 12 years old. She said it was a special gift, that she had kept it for me." "Your mother?" Margaret felt her heart race. "Where did she get it?" "I don't know," Natalie replied, and for the first time her voice trembled. "My mother never liked talking much about those things. She adopted me when I was a child." Margaret had to sit down. Her legs could no longer support her. Natalie, noticing the woman's state, rushed to get a glass of water. While drinking, Margaret observed every detail of Natalie's face, the brown eyes, the shape of the nose, the curve of the chin. It could be a coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. "How old are you?" Margaret asked when she managed to recover her voice. 31. The age matched. Abigail would be 31 now, if she were alive, if she could be found. "Do you remember anything before the adoption?" Margaret pressed, leaning forward. Natalie hesitated. There was something in her eyes, a shadow that passed too quickly for Margaret to interpret. "Not much," she finally admitted. "Some confused images. Nothing concrete. My mother always said it was better not to dig into the past." "I need to talk to your mother." Margaret stood up, determination replacing the initial shock. "Where does she live?" "Wait a moment." Natalie blocked the path, her own hands trembling now. You come here, make accusations about a necklace, and want to talk to my mother. How do I know this isn't some kind of scam? The question was fair, Margaret had to admit. She searched through her purse until she found the photo she always carried with her. A faded photo of Abigail wearing the necklace, smiling at the camera on a sunny day. Natalie took the photo with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned every detail of the image, lingering on the girl's face, on the necklace identical to the one she was wearing now. She looks a little like me, Natalie murmured, so quietly that Margaret almost didn't hear her. Yes, Margaret agreed, her voice choked up. She does look like her. Natalie returned the photo and went to an old dresser in the corner of the living room, from which she took a photograph album yellowed by time. She flipped through it until she found what she was looking for and handed it to Margaret. It was a photo of Natalie as a teenager. She couldn't have been more than 13 or 14, wearing the same necklace. In the background, blurred but recognizable, was a neighborhood that Margaret knew very well. "Where was this photo taken?" she asked, pointing to the background scenery. "I'm not sure. I think near where we lived when I was younger." "Why?" "Because that's the neighborhood where Abigail used to do volunteer work." Margaret felt the pieces starting to fit together in a way that both terrified and gave her hope. She helped at a community daycare every Saturday. Natalie sat down heavily in the chair in front of the sewing machine. Her hands automatically found a piece of fabric on the table, her fingers nervously working the material. "I don't know what you want me to say." She spoke after a long silence. "This necklace is the only thing I have from my past before the adoption. My mother was always very reserved about where I came from. She said she found me in a difficult situation and gave me a home." "What kind of situation?" Margaret insisted. She never specified. Margaret observed the young woman before her. There was as much desperation and confusion on Natalie's face as there must have been on her own. This wasn't her fault. If there really was some connection between Natalie and Abigail, the seamstress was just as much a victim as anyone. "I'm sorry," Margaret said softly. "I know this must be very difficult for you too, but you need to understand I spent 16 years looking for my daughter. 16 years wondering if she was alive, if she was well, if she thought about me. And now I see this necklace. This necklace whose every detail I chose myself, and I can't just ignore it." Natalie nodded slowly, wiping away a tear that escaped. "I understand," she whispered. "If I had a missing daughter, I would do the same thing. But you also need to understand that this is stirring up things I've tried not to think about my whole life. I always knew I was adopted, but I never wanted to look for answers because I was afraid of what I might find. And now the answers have come to you," Margaret finished. "It seems so." The two women looked at each other for a long moment, a silent understanding passing between them. No matter what they discovered from that point on, their lives were already irrevocably intertwined by the mystery of that golden chain. "My mother's name is Martha," Natalie finally said. "Martha Miller. She lives in a housing project on the other side of town. But I need to warn her first. She's an elderly woman with a weak heart. I can't just show up there with you without preparing her." Margaret wanted to protest, wanted to rush immediately to that woman and demand answers. But the genuine concern on Natalie's face made her hesitate. If Martha really had something to do with Abigail's disappearance, frightening an elderly woman wouldn't help at all. "All right," she agreed reluctantly, "but I need you to understand how urgent this is for me. Every day that passes without answers is torture." "I'll call her now." Natalie picked up an old cell phone from the table, "but I can't promise she'll want to talk about it." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. While Natalie dialed, Margaret looked around the small workshop. Half-finished work was scattered in every corner. Wedding dresses in different stages of completion, children's clothing with delicate embroidery, simple repairs waiting for attention. It was clear that Natalie worked hard to make a living. The phone conversation was brief and tense. Margaret could only hear Natalie's side, but it was enough to tell that the news hadn't been well received. "She's very scared," Natalie hung up the phone, looking exhausted. She said she needs time to think, but she agreed to see us tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow? Margaret repeated, frustration seeping into her voice. I can't wait until tomorrow. You'll have to, Natalie answered firmly. My mother raised 4 adopted children on her own. She worked herself to the bone to give us everything we needed. I won't let anyone, not even you, show up and intimidate her without considering her health. Natalie's fierce defense made Margaret step back. She was right. No matter how desperate Margaret was for answers, she had no right to put an elderly woman's health at risk. You're right, Margaret admitted. I'm sorry. I don't want to cause trouble. I just want the truth. The truth might not be what you expect, Natalie warned gently. I know, but after 16 years of uncertainty, any truth is better than this void. Natalie looked again at the photo of Abigail that was still on the table. She was beautiful, she commented. She looked happy in this picture. She was. Margaret took the photo back, tracing the outline of her daughter's face with her finger. Abigail was always a cheerful girl. She made friends easily, helped everyone, maybe even too much. I used to say she trusted people too quickly. What happened? Natalie asked. The day she disappeared, I mean. Margaret closed her eyes, the memory of that day still as vivid as ever. It was a Saturday. She left early in the morning for her volunteer work at the community daycare, as she always did. She said she'd be back for lunch, but she never came back. When night fell and she hadn't shown up, I started calling her friends, the daycare. No one had seen her since mid-morning. She had left saying she was going to grab a quick snack and come back. She was never seen again. Did you search for her? I mean, besides reporting the disappearance? I searched everywhere. Margaret felt the familiar sting of tears. I hired people to investigate, put up posters, gave interviews. During the first few years, every phone call made my heart race, thinking it might be news about her, but nothing. It was as if she had simply vanished. That must have been horrible, Natalie said with sincere compassion. It was. It is. Because it never stops being horrible. The pain may ease with time, but it never goes away. You learn to live with it, but it's always there, like a weight on your chest. Natalie touched the chain around her neck again, thoughtful. How long have you worn that chain? Margaret asked. Ever since my mother gave it to me. I never take it off. I always felt it was important, you know, like it was the only connection I had to whoever I was before. You don't have any memories from before you were 12? A few, Natalie admitted hesitantly. But they're confusing, fragmented. I've never been able to make sense of them. There's one in particular that comes back sometimes. I'm in a white place, very white. There are voices around me, but I can't understand what they're saying, and there's fear. A lot of fear. A chill ran down Margaret's spine. Have you ever tried seeking help? Some kind of therapy to recover those memories? I've thought about it a few times, Natalie confessed, but I've always been afraid of what I might remember. It's easier to just let it go. But what if those memories could answer questions you have? And what if they only bring more pain? Natalie countered. There was no easy answer to that. Margaret knew all too well the weight of carrying painful truths, but she also knew the weight of knowing nothing at all. I'll give you my phone number, Margaret said, writing it on a piece of paper. Please call me if you remember anything, or if your mother wants to talk before tomorrow. Natalie accepted the paper, tucking it carefully into her pocket. Are you going to be okay? She asked, noticing how fragile Margaret seemed. I will, Margaret lied. How could she be okay when her entire life had just been turned upside down again? The drive home was a blur. Margaret drove on autopilot, her mind processing and reprocessing every detail of the conversation, the chain, the adoption, the age that matched perfectly. Natalie's fragmented memories. It could all be a terrible coincidence. After all, jewelry could be stolen, resold, but that specific mark on the pendant, that intentional imperfection that only Margaret and the jeweler knew about, was hard to ignore. At home, Margaret went straight to the room she kept exactly as Abigail had left it. Over the years, many people had suggested she should rearrange the space, turn it into something else. But Margaret never could. It was as if changing anything would be admitting that Abigail was never coming back. She opened the desk drawer and took out an envelope full of photos. She spent the entire night comparing each one to her memory of Natalie's face. There were similarities, she couldn't deny it, but similarities meant nothing. The world was full of people who looked alike. Still, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered possibilities she didn't dare fully consider. The phone rang at 2 a.m, making Margaret jump. It was Natalie. "I'm sorry to call so late," her voice was trembling, "but I just had a nightmare and needed to talk to someone." "What kind of nightmare?" Margaret asked, now fully alert. "It's always the same," Natalie explained. "I'm running down a white corridor. There are doors on each side, but they're all locked. I hear someone screaming my name, but it's not Natalie. It's another name I can't quite make out. And there's a blonde woman at the end of the corridor. She's crying and reaching out her hands to me, but no matter how hard I run, I can never reach her." Margaret felt the air leave her lungs. She was blonde, or at least she used to be before the grey hairs took over. "How long have you had this nightmare?" she managed to ask. "As long as I can remember. It used to happen every night when I was younger. Now it's rarer, but when it comes, it's so vivid that I wake up sweating and with my heart racing." "Natalie," Margaret chose her words carefully, "have you considered that this nightmare might be a repressed memory?" "I have," Natalie replied after a pause. "But it's so frightening that I'd rather believe it's just a dream." "And what if it isn't? Then it means there's something in my past that my mind is trying very, very desperately to forget." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken possibilities. "I talked to my mother again," Natalie finally said. "I said I couldn't put this off, that I needed answers as much as you do. We can go there tomorrow morning if you want." "Yes," Margaret replied immediately. "What time?" 10 o'clock. I can come pick you up." "I'll be ready." After they hung up, Margaret couldn't get to sleep. She spent the rest of the night sitting by the window, watching the city slowly wake in the dawn light. So many questions, so few answers. And now, finally, maybe, just maybe, she was close to discovering something. Natalie arrived promptly at 10 o'clock in an old but well-kept car. Margaret noticed that she too seemed not to have slept. There were deep dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she held the steering wheel. "Are you prepared for this?" Margaret asked as they got into the car. "I don't know if anyone can be prepared for something like this," Natalie answered honestly, "but I need to know." The trip was made in tense silence. Margaret watched the city pass by the window, each block taking her closer to answers she had been seeking for so long. At the same time, fear grew in her chest. What if the answers weren't what she wanted to hear? The housing project was modest but clean. 4-story buildings painted a faded shade of yellow, small but well-kept gardens in the common areas. Children played in the playground, while elderly people chatted on benches under the trees. "It's there," Natalie pointed to the second building, apartment 203. They went up the stairs in silence. At each step, Margaret's heart beat faster. When Natalie knocked on the door, Margaret had to hold onto the railing to keep from falling. The woman who opened the door had completely white hair pulled into a bun, a face marked by deep wrinkles that spoke of a life of hard work. Her eyes, though, still held the brightness of someone with a sharp mind. She looked from Natalie to Margaret, and back to Natalie. "So it's you," said Martha, her voice hoarse but firm. "The mother." Margaret couldn't respond. There was something in the way Martha looked at her, a mixture of compassion and guilt that made her stomach churn. "Come in." Martha stepped back from the door. "I think this conversation can't be had in the hallway." The apartment was small but welcoming, old but well-kept furniture, photographs of children of different ages covering the walls, the smell of fresh coffee coming from the kitchen. It was clearly the home of someone who had dedicated her life to taking care of others. "Sit down." Martha indicated a worn sofa. "I'll get coffee." "Mom." Natalie stopped her. "No need. We just want to talk." "I know what you want," Martha replied, and there was deep weariness in her voice. "But I'll get the coffee anyway. Some conversations need coffee." While Martha was in the kitchen, Margaret examined the photographs. There were several of Natalie at different ages, always smiling, always surrounded by other children. A family built not by blood, but by choice. Martha came back with a tray, 3 steaming cups, and a plate of simple cookies. Her hands trembled slightly as she served. "I know why you're here," she said directly to Margaret without beating around the bush. "The necklace." "Yes," Margaret confirmed. "This necklace belonged to my daughter, and I want to know how it ended up with Natalie." Martha took a long sip of her coffee, as if she needed the caffeine to gather the courage for what was to come. "I found Natalie 19 years ago," she began, her voice low but clear. "At a bus terminal downtown. It was winter, it was cold, and she was sitting in a corner, alone. She was wearing dirty clothes, she was very thin, but what caught my attention was her gaze. It was the look of someone who had completely lost herself." Margaret felt the tears beginning to fall. "I approached her," Martha continued, looking at her own hands. "I asked her name. She looked at me as if she didn't understand the question. I asked where her parents were. She just shook her head. I asked if she was hungry. She nodded. "Why didn't you take her to the authorities?" Margaret asked, her voice coming out harsher than she intended. "I tried," Martha replied, meeting Margaret's eyes for the first time. "I took her to the nearest station. But when we got there, she panicked. She started screaming, shaking, thrashing. It was so intense that the officers thought it best to let me take her and come back later when she was calmer." "And you didn't go back?" Margaret accused. "I did go back," Martha contradicted. 3 times. But every time I tried to leave her, the same thing happened. Complete panic. And later, when I talked to her away from there, I found out she didn't remember anything. She didn't know her name. She didn't know where she came from. She didn't recognize anything. It was as if her mind had simply erased everything. "Amnesia," Natalie murmured. "Yes," Martha confirmed. "I took her to private doctors, the ones I could afford. They all said the same thing: severe trauma can cause dissociative amnesia, that the memories might come back or not, that forcing it could make things worse." "So you just decided to keep her?" Margaret asked, incredulous. "It wasn't that simple," Martha defended herself. "I waited. I looked for stories about missing children. I looked at posters. I tried to find someone who might be looking for her. But there was nothing. No photo that looked like her, no report that matched. Because she didn't disappear as a child, Margaret felt the revelation hit her. She was 15 when she disappeared." 15? Martha seemed genuinely surprised. "But the girl I found didn't look older than 11 or 12. Malnutrition can make a person look younger," Margaret explained, "especially if she went through something traumatic." Natalie had remained completely quiet, listening to everything with a growing expression of shock. "The necklace," Margaret returned to the crucial point. "How was she wearing the necklace?" "She was wearing it when I found her," Martha replied. "It was the only thing she had. I tried to take it off once to clean it, but she became so distressed that I never tried again. It seemed to be the only thing that made her feel safe." Margaret looked at Natalie, saw the young woman holding the necklace so tightly that her knuckles were white. "Do you remember any of this?" she asked gently. Natalie shook her head, silent tears streaming down her face. "Just the nightmares," she whispered. "And that feeling that there's something important I've forgotten." "There's more," Martha said after a pause. "In the first few months she used to murmur a name in her sleep. I wrote it down because I thought it might be important. It was a name I had never heard before." "What name?" Margaret asked, barely able to breathe. Martha got up and went to a bookshelf from which she took an old notebook. She flipped through it until she found the page she was looking for. "Here," she showed. She said Abby. Not Abigail, but Abby. I thought it could be her name or someone importance. Margaret closed her eyes. Abby. It was the nickname she had for Abigail when her daughter was little, a name that practically no one else used. "It was me," she said, her voice breaking. "I used to call her that when she was a baby." The silence that followed was absolute. Martha seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. Natalie looked from one woman to the other, reality slowly sinking in. "So it's true," Natalie finally said. "I'm her. I'm Abigail." "We don't know that for sure yet." Margaret tried to keep her composure despite the overwhelming emotion. "We need proof, tests. We can't just assume." "But you know," Natalie insisted, looking directly at Margaret. "Deep down, you already know, don't you?" Margaret looked at the young woman before her. She saw the similarities she had tried to deny. The shape of the eyes, the way she bit her lip when nervous, the way she gestured when she spoke. They were echoes of Abigail, but would they be enough? "I need certainty," she said firmly. 16 years of hope and disappointment have taught me not to trust coincidences. "But these aren't just coincidences," Martha interjected. "The unique necklace, the matching age, the nickname, it all fits." "Or someone wants it to fit," Margaret countered. "It wouldn't be the first time someone tried to pass themselves off as my daughter, hoping for some kind of reward." "You think I want money?" Natalie asked, hurt. "I don't know what to think," Margaret admitted. "My heart wants to believe I've finally found my daughter, but my head tells me to be careful, not to fool myself again." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. "Then do the tests," Natalie said, squaring her shoulders. "Do as many as needed. I need to know the truth too. I also need to know who I really am." "There's a DNA test," Margaret said, "but it takes a few weeks to get the results." "Then let's do it," Natalie agreed. "But while we wait, can I ask other questions? About Abigail? About who she was?" Margaret hesitated. Talking about Abigail always hurt, but it was also a way to keep her alive. And if this young woman really was her daughter, she had the right to know. "Go ahead," she agreed. "What do you want to know?" "Everything," Natalie answered simply. "Tell me everything about her." And Margaret told her. She talked about how Abigail had been born on a spring morning, 3 weeks early, in a hurry to meet the world. How she had been a happy baby who rarely cried. How she learned to walk at just 9 months, falling and getting back up with determination until she made it. She talked about Abigail's first day of school, so excited she woke up 2 hours early, about how she made friends instantly, always including the children who were left out, about her love for music, how she sang all the time, making up melodies for everything. Natalie listened with intense attention, sometimes touching the necklace, sometimes closing her eyes, as if trying to force the memories to come back. "Did she have any distinct physical feature?" Natalie asked. "Any birthmark scar?" "She had a birthmark," Margaret answered. "On the inside of her left arm, near the elbow. It was shaped like a small crescent moon." Natalie slowly rolled up her sleeve, revealing exactly what Margaret had described. A birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. The air seemed to leave the room. Margaret reached out with a trembling hand, gently touching the mark. It was exactly as she remembered. "Lots of people have birthmarks," Natalie said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Not in that exact shape, in that exact place," Margaret replied. "I used to kiss that mark when Abigail was little. I used to say it was magical, that the moon had touched her to bring her luck." Tears began to stream freely down Natalie's face. "Why don't I remember?" she asked in anguish. "Why don't I remember any of this?" "Trauma can do strange things to the mind," Martha said gently, touching her adopted daughter's shoulder. "It's a form of protection." "Protection from what?" Natalie questioned. "What happened to me that was so bad my mind chose to erase it all?" It was the question everyone wanted to answer. Margaret looked at Martha, who seemed equally lost. "You said you found her at a bus terminal," Margaret reminded her. "Did she have anything else besides the necklace? Any documents, a backpack, anything?" "Nothing," Martha confirmed. "Just the clothes on her back and the necklace. She was barefoot. She had cuts and scrapes on her feet as if she had walked a long way." "And you never tried to investigate further?" Margaret couldn't hide the accusation in her voice. "I did try," Martha replied, a flash of anger appearing in her eyes. "I went back to that station countless times asking if anyone had seen her arrive, if anyone knew where she had come from. No one knew anything. It was as if she had simply appeared out of nowhere." Someone must have taken her there, Margaret insisted. A child or teenager doesn't cross an entire city without being noticed. Unless someone wanted her not to be noticed, Natalie said softly. They all looked at her. What do you mean? Margaret asked. Grit. I'm trying to understand, Natalie explained, her voice gaining strength as she reasoned. If I really am Abigail, if I disappeared at 15 and was found looking 12, something very serious happened in between. Something that left me malnourished, traumatized, without memory. That doesn't happen by accident. You think someone did this to you on purpose? Margaret felt horror settling in her chest. I don't know, Natalie admitted. But it makes sense, doesn't it? Why else would my mind erase everything? We need to find out what happened in those months between your disappearance and when Martha found you, Margaret said, determination replacing shock. Something happened, something that connects the dots. It's been 16 years, Martha pointed out. How are we going to find out now what happened then? Investigation, Margaret replied. I've hired investigators before, I can hire them again. But this time we have a starting point. We know where Natalie was found, when she was found. We can work backward from there. What if we find out something we don't want to know? Natalie asked, fear evident in her voice. Then at least we'll know, Margaret replied. The truth, no matter how painful, is better than uncertainty. Natalie nodded slowly, but Margaret could see the terror in her eyes, and she didn't blame her. The young woman was being forced to confront a past she had spent her entire life trying to ignore. First, the DNA test, Margaret decided. We need to establish whether you really are mother and daughter before moving forward. The rest can wait until we're sure. I agree, Natalie said. But while we wait for the results, can we start looking for other ways to confirm? Like what? Medical records, Natalie suggested. If I am Abigail, there must be medical records of her somewhere. We can compare them with mine. Vaccinations, blood type, allergies, things like that. That's a good idea, Margaret agreed. I still have all of Abigail's medical records at home. And I have Natalie's, Martha added. At least from the last 19 years. Then let's start there, Margaret said. Today we'll collect the material for the DNA test. Then we compare the medical records. And if everything matches, that's when we start investigating what happened. The three women looked at each other, a strange alliance formed by the need for truth. Margaret saw in Martha not a rival, but someone who had saved and cared for her daughter when she herself couldn't. And in Natalie, she saw both the young woman she was now and the shadow of the girl she had lost. There's something I don't understand, Natalie said after a moment. If I really am Abigail, if I disappeared at 15, why weren't there news reports, posters, anything that Martha could find? There were, Margaret answered bitterly. Thousands of posters, dozens of news stories. Your picture was in every newspaper, every newscast. How could you not have seen any of that? I didn't watch television back then, Martha admitted. I couldn't afford it, and I was working too much to read the papers. By the time I finally managed to buy a TV, more than a year had passed. I figured if someone was looking for you, they would have shown up by then. But I kept looking, Margaret said, for years. Even when everyone told me to give up, to accept that she probably wasn't coming back, I never stopped. I'm so sorry, Martha said sincerely. If I had known, if I had made the connection, I would have reached out. I know, Margaret replied, and she could tell it was true. Martha wasn't a bad person. She had only tried to help a child in need the best way she knew how. I should have pushed harder, Martha continued, guilt weighing on her words. I should have forced the authorities to pay attention. I should have searched more. And I should have taken better care of her, Margaret countered. I should have paid more attention. I should have noticed if something was wrong. We could spend the rest of our lives blaming ourselves for what we should have done differently, but that doesn't change the past. It just makes the present harder, Natalie finished. Margaret looked at the young woman and saw wisdom beyond her years. How many other hardships had Natalie faced that had made her grow up so fast? Tell me about your life, Margaret asked. These 19 years with Martha. What was it like? Natalie exchanged a look with Martha before answering. It was hard at first, she admitted. Not just because of the lack of memories, but because I felt so lost, like I was floating with nothing to anchor me. But Martha was patient. She gave me time, space, love. She taught me to sew, because she said working with your hands helps calm the mind. And did it help? Margaret asked. Yes, Natalie smiled softly. I discovered I had a knack for it, that I could create beautiful things with my hands. It gave me a purpose when I felt like I had nothing. Abigail loved making things with her hands too, Margaret recalled. She adored arts and crafts. She would spend hours making necklaces, bracelets, decorations. See? Martha said. Another connection. But Margaret had learned not to trust connections alone. She needed concrete proof. Let's go to the lab, she said, getting up. The sooner we do the test, the sooner we'll have answers. The sample collection was quick and painless. A simple cheek swab from each of them, and it was done. The technician said results would take 2 to 3 weeks. 3 weeks that would feel like an eternity. When they left the lab, Margaret turned to Natalie. What do we do now? She asked. We just wait? I think so, Natalie answered. Unless you have another idea, Margaret thought. 3 weeks of uncertainty, of possibilities, of hopes she was afraid to feed too much. We could see each other again, she suggested hesitantly. It doesn't have to be anything formal. Maybe coffee. I can bring more photos, tell more stories about Abigail. Even if in the end you're not her, it would be nice to talk about her with someone who's interested. Natalie smiled, and for a brief second, Margaret saw Abigail in that smile. I'd like that, she said, and maybe hearing the stories something will stir my memory. Or maybe not, Martha warned gently. You need to be prepared for that possibility too. I know, Natalie agreed, but I have to try. They agreed to meet 2 days later at a cafe near Natalie's workshop. Margaret spent those 2 days organizing photos, remembering stories, emotionally preparing herself to revisit memories she had guarded so carefully. The cafe was small and cozy, with worn wooden tables and the rich aroma of fresh coffee beans. Natalie was already there when Margaret arrived, a cup of tea in front of her, the gold chain gleaming against her simple blue blouse. I brought a complete album, Margaret said, pulling a thick volume from her bag. I thought it would be easier this way. They spent the next 2 hours going through every page. Margaret narrated each photo, each captured moment. Abigail's first day of school, her 10th birthday at the pool with a dozen friends, the school dance performance where she had forgotten the steps, but improvised so well that no one noticed. Natalie absorbed everything with an intensity that was almost painful to watch. Her fingers traced the outlines of the photos, her eyes searching for some flicker of recognition that stubbornly refused to come. She was very smiley, Natalie observed. In almost every photo, she's smiling. That was her nature, Margaret replied. Abigail found joy in the little things. A sunny day, a beautiful song, a hug from a friend. She used to say life was too short to waste time being unhappy. She sounds like a wonderful person, Natalie said softly. She was. She is, Margaret corrected herself quickly. No matter what had happened, she refused to speak of Abigail in the past tense. Can I ask about her father? Natalie hesitated. Sorry if that's too personal. No, it's fine, Margaret replied, though the question caught her off guard. Abigail's father. We separated when she was 5. He moved to another state, built a new life. He keeps in sporadic contact, but he was never very present. Does he know about the disappearance? Yes. He even came when it happened, took part in the initial searches. But after a few months he went back to his life. He said he couldn't put everything on hold indefinitely. Margaret couldn't hide the bitterness in her voice. That must have been hard, Natalie commented with empathy. Dealing with the loss alone. I had help, Margaret said. Friends, family. But yes, there were times when the loneliness was almost unbearable, especially at night when the house got too quiet. Did you ever think about moving, starting over somewhere else? I thought about it many times, Margaret admitted, but I always asked myself, what if Abigail came back and I wasn't there? What if she needed to find me and I had disappeared too? So I stayed. I kept everything the same. Waiting. Natalie reached across the table and touched Margaret's hand. It was a simple gesture but full of understanding. I need to tell you something, Natalie said after a moment. Ever since I first saw you at the workshop, I've been having more of those nightmares. But now they're different. Different how? Now I can see the face of the blonde woman in the hallway, Natalie explained. And she looks like you. Margaret felt her heart skip a beat. That could just be suggestion, she forced herself to say rationally. Your mind might be projecting because you want it to be true. I know, Natalie agreed. That's why I don't want to put too much weight on it, but it's hard to ignore. Is there anything else in the dreams? Anything that could be a real clue? Natalie thought for a long moment. There's a smell, she said finally. This might sound strange, but in the dreams there's always a specific smell. Chemical, somewhat sweet, but in a way that makes your stomach churn. Can you describe it better? It's like a hospital, but not exactly. Stronger. More artificial. Natalie struggled to find the right words. And there are voices too, but I can't understand what they're saying. It's like they're speaking in another language or too quietly. Margaret made a mental note. That could be important. Have you considered seeing a therapist? She suggested. Someone specializing in recovering traumatic memories? Martha mentioned that a few times, Natalie admitted. But I've always been afraid. Afraid that the memories that come back would be worse than not remembering. I understand, Margaret said, but what if they could help explain what happened? Give us the answers we need. What if the answers are too terrible to bear? Then we'll bear them together, Margaret said before she could stop herself. If you really are Abigail, if this is real, you won't have to face it alone. Not ever again. Tears filled Natalie's eyes. You shouldn't make promises like that before you're sure. Maybe not, Margaret agreed. But my mother's instinct is screaming that you're my daughter. And even if the tests say otherwise, I still care about what happens to you now. Why? Natalie asked, genuinely confused. I'm just a stranger who may or may not be the person you're looking for. Because you deserve someone who cares, Margaret answered simply. Martha clearly loves you, but she's getting older, getting tired, and you're carrying so much weight all by yourself. No one should have to do that. But I'm not your responsibility. No, you're not, Margaret agreed. But maybe I need this as much as you do. Maybe I need someone to take care of, someone to fight for. 16 years is a long time to carry hope without direction. Natalie wiped her tears with the back of her hand. You're very kind, she said. Too kind to someone who's only brought confusion into your life. You haven't brought confusion, Margaret corrected. You've brought possibility, and that's more than I've had in a long time. They finished their coffee in a more comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they parted, Margaret hugged Natalie impulsively. The young woman went rigid for a second before relaxing and returning the embrace. We'll see each other again soon, Margaret asked as they pulled apart. Yes, Natalie agreed. I'd like that. The following days established a new pattern. Margaret and Natalie met regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes just to talk. Margaret brought more photos, more stories. Natalie listened to everything, asking questions, desperately trying to find something that resonated. Martha sometimes joined them, and Margaret learned to appreciate the older woman. She had raised Natalie with love and dedication, working multiple jobs to give her and the other foster children everything they needed. It hadn't been easy, but Martha never gave up. 2 weeks after the DNA test, Margaret received an unexpected phone call. It was from a woman named Gladys, who had seen a post Margaret had made in a social media group about missing persons. I read your story about the necklace, Gladys explained, and I think I might have information about your daughter. Margaret felt her heart race. What kind of information? 16 years ago, I worked as a nurse at a private clinic, Gladys began hesitantly. It was a discreet place, you know. It treated patients who wanted privacy. Often they were delicate cases. Go on, Margaret encouraged, barely able to breathe. There was a young patient, a teenager. She was brought in by an older woman who claimed to be her aunt. The girl was pregnant, but in bad shape, malnourished, traumatized. She went into premature labor. Margaret felt the world spin. What happened to her? She forced herself to ask. The delivery was complicated, very complicated. The girl lost a lot of blood, went into shock. For a moment we thought she wouldn't survive. But she survived, although she was left very weakened, and when she woke up she didn't remember anything. Absolutely nothing. "And the baby?" Margaret asked, although part of her was afraid of the answer. "He survived too. A boy. But the woman who brought the girl in took the baby and disappeared. We said we should report it to the authorities, that something was wrong there. But the woman threatened to sue the clinic for negligence, said she would ruin us if we said anything, and we were afraid." "You let her take the baby," Margaret said, the disgust clear in her voice. "Yes," Gladys admitted with shame, "and that haunts me to this day. The girl stayed at the clinic for a few more weeks, but she was so confused, so lost. One night she simply disappeared. We searched everywhere, but she was gone." "When did this happen?" "In the winter of 2009. I remember because it was near Christmas." The timeline matched perfectly. Abigail disappeared in the summer of 2009. If she was pregnant, the baby would have been born months later, exactly as Gladys described. "Can you identify the girl if I show you a photo?" Margaret asked. "I can try," Gladys replied, "but it's been so many years." Margaret texted the most recent photo she had of Abigail. She waited in agony as the minutes felt like hours. "It's her," Gladys finally answered. "I'm almost certain. The eyes, the shape of the face, it's her." Margaret had to sit down, so it was true, everything was true. Abigail had been pregnant. She had lost her memory after a traumatic birth. And there was a baby, a grandson Margaret didn't even know existed. "I need more information," she said to Gladys. "Everything you remember, name of the clinic, name of the woman who brought her in, anything." "The clinic closed years ago," Gladys said, "but I have some records I kept. I knew that someday someone might come looking. I can send you everything I have." After they hung up, Margaret sat in shock. She had a grandson. Somewhere in the world, there was a child who carried Abigail's blood. A child who must already be 15 or 16 now. She called Natalie immediately. "I need to see you," she said when Natalie answered. "Now, it's urgent." They met at their usual cafe. Margaret barely let Natalie sit down before spilling everything Gladys had told her. Natalie grew pale as the story unfolded. "A baby," she whispered. "I had a baby and I don't remember." "And someone took him," Margaret added. "Someone who clearly didn't have good intentions." "We need to find him," Natalie said, her voice gaining urgency. "If I really am Abigail, then there's a child out there who is mine, ours. I'm going to hire a private investigator," Margaret decided. "With the information Gladys will give me, we have a starting point. We can work from there." "But the medical records," Natalie reminded. "The clinic closed. How are we going to find anything?" "Gladys said she has some records," Margaret explained. "And even if the clinic closed, there must be documents somewhere. Birth certificates, adoption records if the baby was adopted. We'll find something." Natalie touched the necklace around her neck, the now familiar gesture she made when nervous. "This changes everything," she said. "If there's a child, my child, lost out there, I can't just wait for the DNA results. I need to act now." "I agree," Margaret said. "But we need to be smart about this. Whoever took the baby clearly had reasons to hide him. They could be dangerous. Or they could just be someone who wanted a child and took advantage of a terrible situation," Natalie countered. "Either way, we need professional help," Margaret insisted. "I'll make some calls today. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, the investigator Margaret hired was a discreet man named Graham, with decades of experience in missing persons cases. He listened to the whole story with a neutral expression, taking occasional notes. "It's a complicated case," he admitted when Margaret finished. 16 years is a long time. Trails go cold, memories fail, documents disappear. But it's not impossible. "Can you find my grandson?" Margaret asked directly. "I can try," Graham answered honestly. "I'll start with the records your friend Gladys will provide. See if I can track down the woman who took the baby, find out if there was a legal adoption or other circumstances." Other circumstances, Natalie repeated, fear evident in her voice. I'd rather not speculate until I have facts, Graham said gently. But you need to be prepared for any possibility. The baby may have been legally adopted and be in a loving home, or there may have been irregularities. We don't know yet. Margaret and Natalie exchanged worried looks. How long will it take? Margaret asked. Depends on what I find. Could be days, could be weeks, or more, Graham admitted. But I'll work as fast as I can. Over the following days, Margaret and Natalie's lives became a strange combination of waiting and anticipation. They waited for the DNA results, waited for news from Graham, waited for their memories to return. But they also began building something new, a connection that transcended the question of whether or not they were biologically related. They found comfort in each other, mutual understanding in their shared pain. Martha watched it all with a mixture of joy and melancholy. Joy because Natalie was finally confronting her past, finally searching for answers. Melancholy because she knew that, no matter the outcome, things would never be the same. It was Martha who first noticed the change in Natalie. "You're remembering something," she said one night while they were having dinner. "I can see it in your eyes." Natalie hesitated, then slowly nodded. "They're just fragments," she admitted. "Not complete stories, just sensations, smells, sounds, emotions." "Like what?" Martha encouraged. "Music," Natalie said. "There's always music playing in the corners of my mind. A specific melody I can't identify, but it feels important." "Can you hum it?" Martha asked. Natalie tried, producing a simple but beautiful melody. Martha didn't recognize it, but she picked up the phone and called Margaret. "Natalie is humming a song," she explained. "Do you think it could be something Abigail knew?" Margaret asked to hear it. When Natalie hummed it again over the phone, Margaret felt the tears begin to well up. "It's the lullaby," she whispered. "I used to sing that song to Abigail every night when she was little. I made it up especially for her." Absolute silence followed that revelation. "How do you remember that?" Margaret asked Natalie softly. "I don't know," Natalie replied, her voice trembling. "I was at the workshop today, sewing, and suddenly the melody was there, as if it had always been there, just waiting to be remembered." "What else do you remember?" Margaret pressed gently. "Hands," Natalie said. "Soft hands brushing through my hair, and a voice saying everything would be all right, that I was loved, that I would never be alone." Margaret couldn't hold back the sob that escaped her. "I said that every night," she confessed. "After the lullaby, I always said those same words." "This can't be a coincidence," Martha said firmly. "There are too many connections for it to be mere chance." "We're still waiting on the DNA," Margaret forced herself to remember. "We can't be completely certain yet." "But you know," Natalie insisted. "Deep down in your heart you already know, don't you?" Margaret looked at the phone, wishing she could see Natalie's face instead of just hearing her voice. "Yes," she finally admitted. "My heart knows, but my head still needs confirmation." "And if the test comes back negative?" Natalie asked, her voice small. "What if after all of this, we're not related?" "Then my heart is wrong," Margaret said simply, "but that won't change the fact that you've come to mean so much to me. DNA or not, you've become important in my life." "For me too," Natalie replied. "You and Martha, you've both become very important." "You're lucky to have two mothers who love you," Martha teased, but there was emotion in her voice. "I really am," Natalie agreed. "No matter what the future brings, I'm grateful for that." 2 days later, Graham called with news. "I found something," he said without preamble. The records Teresa provided included a temporary birth certificate. The baby was registered as name to be determined, mother unknown. But there's a note from a social worker who visited the clinic back then. "And?" Margaret pressed impatiently. "The social worker noted suspicions of irregularities, but when she returned to investigate further, the clinic had discharged the patient, and the case was filed as lacking sufficient evidence," Graham explained. "But I managed to track down the social worker. She's still alive and remembers the case." "Can she help?" "I'm already setting up a meeting with her," Graham confirmed. "But there's more. I managed to access old clinic records before they closed. There are notes about the woman who brought the patient in. What kind of notes? She identified herself as Evelyn Smith. She gave an address that, as I expected, was fake, but the physical description is there, and there's a note saying she made regular visits to other similar clinics. Margaret felt a chill. Other clinics? You think she did this regularly? Took pregnant girls to clinics and took the babies? It's a possibility I need to investigate, Graham said carefully, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. Find that woman, Margaret ordered. No matter what it costs. I need to know what she did with my grandson. I'm working on it, Graham assured her. But Mrs. Margaret, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the baby may no longer be in the United States. These illegal adoption operations often involve international networks. Then we'll find him abroad if necessary, Margaret replied with determination. I'm not giving up now. After hanging up, Margaret realized how much had changed in just a few weeks. Before, her life had been a monotonous succession of empty days, filled only with memories and regrets. Now she had purpose again. She had a reason to fight. She shared the news with Natalie, who reacted with a mixture of hope and terror. What if we find him, and he doesn't want anything to do with us? Natalie voiced her fear. He might have a family, a life. He might not want two strangers showing up claiming to be his mother and grandmother. Then we'll respect his wishes, Margaret replied, but at least we'll know he's okay, that he's safe, and when he's ready, if he ever is, we'll be there. That sounds very mature and rational, Natalie commented. On the outside, yes, Margaret admitted. On the inside, I'm terrified, but I've learned over the years that we can't control everything. Sometimes all we can do is our best and hope it's enough. The meeting with the social worker took place in a small coffee shop downtown. Her name was Gladys, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes that had seen a lot of pain over the years. I remember that clinic, she said when Graham asked his questions, and I vaguely remember the case. A young girl, too young to be in that situation. She seemed so lost, so scared. Did you see the woman who brought her? Graham asked. I did, Martha confirmed. A middle-aged woman, very elegant, very controlling. She wouldn't let the girl speak for herself, answered all the questions for her, set off all my red flags. But you couldn't do anything? I tried, Martha said with frustration. But when I went back to investigate further, the girl was gone. The clinic said she had been discharged against medical advice, and without a victim to testify there was no case. And the baby? Margaret asked, unable to stay quiet. That's the part that haunts me to this day, Martha admitted. I never saw the baby. The clinic said there were complications, and he was transferred to a hospital, but when I tried to verify, there was no record of any transfer. It was as if the baby had never existed. Someone took him. Margaret felt the anger rise. That woman, Evelyn Smith, or whatever her real name is, took my grandson and disappeared. That's what I always suspected, Martha agreed. But without proof I couldn't do anything, and believe me, I tried. Do you remember anything else about this woman? Graham insisted. Any detail could help. Martha thought for a long moment. She had an accent, she said finally. Subtle, but it was there. I couldn't place where it was from, but it definitely wasn't from here. Could have been from another region of the United States, Graham noted. That gives us something to work with. And there was one thing, Martha added, a scar on her right hand. I remember because she wore a lot of expensive jewelry, but that scar stood out. It looked like an old burn. Graham wrote everything down meticulously. That's very helpful, he said. It gives us physical characteristics to look for. After they parted ways with Martha, Margaret turned to Graham. How long will it take to find this woman? It depends, Graham answered honestly. If she's still in the country, if she's still using the same name or something similar, we might get lucky. But if she changed her identity completely or left the United States, it could take much longer. We don't have much time, Margaret said. My grandson has been out there for 15 or 16 years. Every day that passes is a day we could be together. I understand your urgency, Graham said gently. But rushing can lead to mistakes. I need to do this right so we don't lose the trail. Margaret knew he was right, but the impatience gnawed at her from within. The DNA results arrived exactly 3 weeks after the samples were collected, as promised. Margaret received the envelope with hands trembling so much she could barely open it. There it was, in cold, clinical scientific terms, 99.9% probability of maternal-child relationship. Natalie was Abigail. Margaret didn't realize she was crying until she felt the tears wetting the paper. 16 years of searching, of hope, of pain. And finally she had found her daughter. She called Natalie immediately but couldn't speak. She just sobbed on the phone. "It's positive, isn't it?" Natalie asked softly. "It's me. I'm Abigail." "Yes," Margaret finally managed to say. "You're my daughter. My Abigail." She heard Natalie start crying on the other end of the line. "I don't know how to feel," Natalie admitted between sobs. "I'm happy, scared, confused, all at the same time." "Me too," Margaret confessed. "But I'm mostly grateful to have found you, grateful that you're alive." "What do we do now?" Natalie asked. "Now," Margaret took a deep breath. "Now we try to build what we lost, and we find your son." "Our son," Natalie corrected. "He's our grandson." The word "our" sent a wave of warmth through Margaret's chest. Yes, our. A family, finally reunited, or at least beginning to come together. "I need to see you," Margaret said. "Can I come over?" "I'm already on my way to your house," Natalie replied. "Martha is driving. We need to be together right now." When Natalie arrived, the two women simply embraced. There weren't enough words to express the whirlwind of emotions. Years of pain and separation, weeks of uncertainty, all culminating in that moment of confirmation. Martha watched with tears of her own. "I knew it was true," she said. "My heart always knew Natalie had a bigger story than she could remember." "Thank you," Margaret said to Martha sincerely, "for saving her, for taking care of her, for loving her when I couldn't. I'll never be able to repay that." "You don't need to repay," Martha replied. "I loved Natalie from the moment I saw her. She's my daughter as much as she is yours." "Then let's share her," Margaret proposed. "There's no reason for choices or divisions. Natalie is lucky enough to have 2 mothers who love her. 3 if we count the whole life I had without remembering," Natalie joked through her tears. The 3 women embraced together, forming an unconventional but real and true family. "Now we need to focus on finding your son," Martha said as they pulled apart. "You said you hired an investigator?" "Yes," Margaret confirmed. "Graham is working on the case. He already has some leads on the woman who took the baby." "I need to tell you something," Natalie said hesitantly. "Ever since I found out about the baby, I've been having more memory flashes. Not a lot, but something." "What do you remember?" Margaret asked anxiously. "I remember pain," Natalie said softly. "A lot of pain and fear. I remember voices saying the baby wasn't doing well, that he needed special care, and I remember arms taking him away from me. I tried to hold on to him, but I was too weak. Oh dear." Margaret pulled Natalie into a hug. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you went through that alone." "It wasn't your fault," Natalie said. "I know that now. Something happened to me, something that made me disappear. And you spent all those years searching. You can't blame yourself." "I still feel like I should have found you sooner," Margaret admitted. "That I should have searched more, better." "You searched the best you could with what you had," Martha interjected. "Neither of you is to blame. The one to blame is whoever did this to Abigail." "True," Natalie agreed. "And when we find that person, they're going to have to answer for what they did. First we find your son," Margaret said. "Then we'll worry about justice." Graham called a few days later with surprising news. "I found Evelyn Smith," he announced. "Or rather, I found who she really is. Her real name is Evelyn Jenkins, and she has an extensive record." "Record of what?" Margaret asked. "Facilitating illegal adoptions," Graham explained. "She was never formally charged because she always covered her tracks very well, but there have been multiple suspicions over the years. She worked with private clinics, identified pregnant girls in vulnerable situations, and then the babies disappeared. My God, Margaret felt nauseous. How many children? We're not sure, Graham admitted, but we're talking about decades of activity. Could be dozens. Where is she now? Here's the tricky part, Graham said. Evelyn Jenkins died 3 years ago. Cancer. The ground seemed to fall out from under Margaret's feet. Then we'll never know what she did with my grandson, she said, despair leaking into her voice. Not necessarily, Graham quickly reassured her. Evelyn had a daughter, and that daughter might know something about her mother's business. Did you talk to her? Not yet, Graham admitted. I'm being cautious. If the daughter was involved in her mother's illegal activities, I don't want to tip her off before I have all the information. What do you need to do? I need to investigate further, check records, talk to people who knew Evelyn, build a complete case before making any move, Graham explained. This could take a few weeks. We don't have a few weeks, Margaret protested. My grandson is out there somewhere. And if we move too fast, we could lose the only chance to find him, Graham countered firmly. Trust me, Mrs. Margaret, I know it's hard, but you need to trust the process. Margaret forced herself to take a deep breath. All right, she agreed reluctantly. But keep me informed of every step. I promise, Graham assured her. When Margaret shared the news with Natalie, her reaction was surprising. I'm almost relieved, Natalie admitted. I know it's terrible to say this, but the idea of confronting the woman who put me through all of that, I don't know if I'd be ready. I understand, Margaret said, but it also means we'll never get complete answers about what really happened. Maybe we don't need all the answers, Natalie reflected. Maybe just knowing that I've found you and that we're looking for my son is enough. You've changed, Margaret observed. Since we met, you seem stronger, more confident. Having answers helps, Natalie explained. Even if the answers are painful, it's better than living in uncertainty. And having you and Martha, knowing I'm not alone in this journey, makes all the difference. You'll never be alone again, Margaret promised. No matter what happens from here on, we're family now. Family. Natalie repeated the word as if savouring it. I like how that sounds. The following weeks were a mix of building their relationship and intense investigation. Margaret and Natalie spent time together every day, filling in the lost years with stories, shared experiences, building new memories. Natalie began to remember more things. Not big events, but small moments. The taste of a specific cake Margaret used to make, the feel of a favourite blanket, the sound of Margaret's laughter. It's like the memories were always there, Natalie explained, just hidden beneath layers of trauma and time. And now with you here, with the stories you tell, they're slowly emerging. Do you think you'll remember everything eventually? Margaret asked. I don't know, Natalie answered honestly. Part of me wants to remember everything, to know the girl I was before, but another part is afraid of what I'll discover about what happened to me. You don't need to rush, Margaret reassured her. The memories will come when you're ready, or they won't, and that's okay too. You're not defined by your past. You're defined by who you choose to be now. Wise, Natalie commented with a smile. 16 years of therapy taught me a few things, Margaret joked. Graham finally called 6 weeks after his last update. I have news, he said, and there was a note of excitement in his voice that made Margaret's heart race. I found a strong connection. Tell me, Margaret ordered impatiently. Evelyn Jenkins's daughter, her name is Laura Jenkins, works as an administrative assistant at a private school in Chicago. Through contacts, I was able to check some of her personal records. And there's something interesting. What? Laura has an adopted son, a 15-year-old boy named Tyler. The adoption was processed 14 years ago, when the boy was about a year old. Margaret's heart stopped. You think it's him? She whispered. The timeline matches perfectly, Graham confirmed. And there's more. The adoption was processed through an agency that had known connections to Evelyn. Everything points to this being more than a coincidence. I need to see him, Margaret said immediately. I need to know if he's my grandson. You can't just show up, Graham warned. If it really is an irregular adoption, Laura could panic and disappear with the boy. We need to be strategic. Then tell me what the plan is, Margaret demanded. First, we need concrete evidence. Photos of the boy compared to photos of Abigail at the same age, for example. If there are obvious similarities, that's a good start, Graham explained. Then we need to find out more about the circumstances of the adoption. If it really was irregular, we can use that as leverage. And what if it's all legal and above board? Then we can still make the case that the child was conceived under questionable circumstances and that the biological mother never consented to the adoption, Graham replied. But let's take it slow, one step at a time. Margaret shared everything with Natalie, who reacted with a mixture of hope and fear. What if he doesn't want to meet us? She asked for the umpteenth time. What if he has a good life with Laura and doesn't want us showing up and messing everything up? Then we'll respect his wishes. Margaret repeated the same answer she had given before. But he deserves to know the truth about his origins. Everyone deserves that. But what if the truth hurts more than it helps? Natalie, Margaret took her daughter's hands. You yourself said that living in uncertainty was worse than knowing painful truths. Don't you think your son deserves the same chance to choose? Natalie hesitated, then nodded slowly. You're right, she admitted. I'm just scared. Me too, Margaret confessed. But we'll face that fear together. Graham managed to get a photo of Tyler through a careful search on social media. When Margaret saw the image, her heart nearly stopped. The boy was the spitting image of Natalie. Same eyes, same smile, same shape of the face. And there was something of Margaret there too, in the jawline, in the shape of the eyebrows. It's him, she said, with absolute certainty. He's my grandson. Natalie looked at the photo with tears streaming down her face. He's beautiful, she whispered. My son. I have a son, and he's beautiful. Our son, Margaret corrected gently. Our grandson. Our family. How do we get to him? Natalie asked. Graham is working on that, Margaret replied, but I think it's time we were direct. What do you mean? I mean that maybe we should go to Laura and simply tell her the truth, Margaret explained. Show her the evidence we have. The DNA results proving that you are Abigail, the connection to Evelyn and the irregular adoptions. Give her a chance to do the right thing. And if she refuses, then we'll take legal action, Margaret said with determination. But I'd rather try the peaceful path first. For Tyler, he didn't ask to be born into this complicated situation. He doesn't deserve to be dragged through a legal battle if we can avoid it. Graham didn't like the idea at first. It's risky, he warned. If Laura knows you're coming, she might disappear. Or she might be reasonable, Margaret countered. We don't know what kind of person she is. Maybe she didn't even know the adoption was irregular. Or maybe she knew very well and has been involved from the start, Graham pointed out. Either way, we have to try, Margaret insisted. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't give her a chance to do the right thing. Reluctantly, Graham agreed to arrange a meeting. He contacted Laura through her work, saying he had important information about her son's adoption. To everyone's surprise, Laura agreed to meet. The meeting was set at a neutral cafe in Chicago. Margaret, Natalie, and Graham went together, all nervous about how they would be received. Laura Jenkins was a woman in her 40s, professional appearance, hair pulled back in a severe bun. She was waiting for them at a corner table, an untouched cup of coffee in front of her. You're the people who wanted to talk about Tyler, she said without preamble as they approached. Yes, Margaret replied. I'm Margaret Montgomery. This is my daughter Natalie, or Abigail as she was known before, and this is Graham, the investigator we hired. Laura studied each of them with sharp eyes. My secretary said it had something to do with Tyler's adoption. What exactly do you want? First, we want you to know we're not here to cause trouble, Margaret began carefully. We're here because we believe Tyler is Natalie's biological son. Laura went very quiet. Go on, she said finally, and Margaret told the whole story. Abigail's disappearance 16 years ago, how Natalie was found without memory, the pregnancy and the traumatic birth, the woman who took the baby, the connection to Evelyn Jenkins. Laura listened to everything without interrupting, her expression growing paler and paler. My mother, she said when Margaret finished. You're saying my mother stole that baby? We don't know exactly what happened, Margaret said gently, but the evidence suggests the adoption may not have been entirely legal. Laura covered her face with her hands. I always suspected, she admitted, her voice muffled. My mother showed up one day with a baby, saying it was a private adoption, that all the paperwork was in order. But something never added up. The documents were too simple, too convenient, and she refused to talk about the biological mother. Did you know your mother was involved in irregular adoptions? Graham asked. I suspected, Laura corrected, but I never had proof. And Tyler needed a home. I loved him from the moment I saw him. I thought I was giving him a chance at a good life. And you did, Natalie spoke for the first time. Looking at his photo, I can see he's a happy, healthy boy. You did right by him. But you're his mother, Laura said, tears beginning to fall. You have the right to have him back. It's not that simple, Natalie replied. He's my son biologically, yes, but you raised him. You're the only mother he's ever known. I don't want to just rip him away from you. Then what do you want? Laura asked, confusion evident. We want to meet him, Margaret said. We want him to know the truth about his origins, and then we want him to decide what he wants to do. He's only 15, Laura protested. How can he make a decision like that? With our help, Natalie replied. All of ours. You don't have to do this alone, Laura. We can work together for Tyler's sake. Laura looked from one to the other, processing. Why are you being so reasonable? She asked finally. You could just sue me. Try to take Tyler away from me. Because that wouldn't be good for Tyler, Margaret explained. And in the end, it's about him. About what's best for him. Not about what we want or what we think we deserve. I need to think, Laura said. This is a lot to process at once. We understand, Natalie said. But please, don't take too long. Every day that passes is a day I could be getting to know my son. And what if he doesn't want to meet you? Laura challenged. What if you tell him the truth and he gets angry, confused, hurt? Then we'll deal with that, Margaret replied. But lying to him, hiding the truth, will only make things worse when he eventually finds out. And he will find out. These secrets always come to light. Laura nodded slowly, seeing the wisdom in it. I'll talk to him, she decided. But my way, on my time. I need to prepare him properly. That's all we ask, Margaret said. Just give him the chance to know the truth. They exchanged phone numbers and parted with a tenuous agreement in place. Laura would talk to Tyler, prepare him for the revelation, and then arrange a meeting. Do you think she'll follow through? Natalie asked when they were back in the car. I think so, Margaret replied. I saw fear in her eyes, but I also saw honesty. She loves Tyler and wants what's best for him, and deep down she knows the truth is best. I hope you're right, Natalie said. 2 days later, Laura called. I told him, she said without preamble. About you, about the adoption, everything. How did he react? Natalie asked, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. The way any 15-year-old would react, Laura replied. With confusion, anger, lots of questions. But after the initial shock wore off, he said he wants to meet you. Natalie had to sit down, her legs suddenly unable to hold her up. When? She managed to ask. This weekend, if that works for you, Laura suggested. Here at home, where Tyler feels safe and I want to be present, want to be. He's going to need support. Of course, Natalie agreed quickly. Whatever makes Tyler feel comfortable. The rest of the week passed in a blur. Natalie was so nervous she could barely eat or sleep. Margaret tried to reassure her, but she was just as anxious. What if he hates me? Natalie voiced her biggest fear the night before the meeting. What if he blames me for giving him up? You didn't give him up, Margaret reminded her firmly. He was taken from you. There's a big difference. But how do I explain that to him? How do I make a 15-year-old boy understand that I don't remember anything from that period of my life? You simply tell him the truth, Margaret replied, and trust that he's smart enough to understand. Laura said he's a good boy, he'll understand. I hope so, Natalie whispered. Laura's house was a modest 2-story home in a quiet residential neighborhood in Chicago. When Margaret and Natalie arrived on Saturday afternoon, they saw Laura waiting at the door, visibly nervous. He's in the living room, she said in a low voice. He's nervous but ready. Natalie took a deep breath before walking in. And there, sitting on the couch with his hands clasped between his knees, was her son. Tyler was tall for his age, skinny, with brown hair that fell over his eyes. When he looked up at Natalie, she saw her own eyes looking back at her. "Hi," she said, her voice coming out weaker than she intended. "Hi," Tyler replied just as quietly. An awkward moment stretched between them. Then Tyler spoke again. "Laura, my mum. She told me everything. About how I was born, about you, about all of it," he said, looking at his own hands. "I don't know how to feel about it." "I understand," Natalie said, carefully sitting in the armchair across from him. "I imagine it's a lot to process." "Do you really not remember anything?" Tyler asked, looking at her with curiosity mixed with something that might have been hope. "Nothing about when I was born?" "No," Natalie admitted, pain evident in her voice. "I wish I did. I wish I could say I remember holding you for the first time, counting your fingers, all the things a mother should remember, but I don't. Everything from that period is a black void." "That must be scary," Tyler said with surprising maturity. "It is," Natalie agreed. "But do you know what's scarier? Knowing I spent 15 years without knowing you. 15 years in which you grew up, learned, became this amazing person, and I missed all of it." "It wasn't your fault," Tyler said, and Natalie could see that Laura had done a good job explaining the situation. "Thank you for saying that," Natalie whispered. "It means more than you know." Margaret, who had stayed quiet until then, finally spoke. "I'm Margaret," she introduced herself, "your grandmother. And I want you to know we're not here to take you away from Laura or mess up your life. We're here because we want to get to know you, if you want to get to know us too." Tyler looked from one to the other. "I have so many questions," he admitted, "about where I came from, about my biological family, about everything." "You can ask anything," Natalie encouraged. "We'll answer everything we can." And Tyler asked. He asked about Abigail before she disappeared, about Margaret and the search that never ended, about the circumstances of his birth and what happened after. He asked about family, about resemblances, about traditions. Natalie and Margaret answered everything honestly, not hiding the painful parts, but also not overwhelming the boy with unnecessary details. "I look like you," Tyler observed at some point, looking at Natalie. "I have your eyes." "Yes," Natalie smiled through her tears. "And your grandmother's smile." "It's strange," Tyler admitted. "Looking at you and seeing where I came from, I always wondered about that, you know, what I inherited from whom." "Now you know," Margaret said gently. "But Martha is still my mother," Tyler said quickly, looking at the woman who raised him. "No matter what I found out today, she's still my mom." "And she always will be," Natalie agreed. "We don't want to replace her. We just want to be part of your life, if you'll let us." Tyler thought for a long moment. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "I'm not saying no. I just need time to process everything." "Of course," Margaret said. "Take all the time you need." The meeting ended with awkward but sincere hugs. Tyler promised to stay in touch and to think about how he wanted to proceed. On the way back, Natalie was quiet, processing everything. "He's perfect," she finally said. "My son is absolutely perfect." "Yes," Margaret agreed. "Martha did a wonderful job with him. Part of me is jealous," Natalie confessed. "Jealous that she got 15 years with him and I didn't. But another part is so grateful that he had a good mother, a good life." "Both of those things can coexist," Margaret said wisely. "You can be grateful and jealous at the same time. You don't have to choose one or the other." "It's so complicated," Natalie sighed. "Family always is," Margaret replied. "But the complication is worth it." Tyler took 2 weeks to process everything. Then he called, his voice young but determined. "I want to try," he said. "I want to get to know you for real. But slowly, okay? I don't want to force anything." "Slow is perfect," Natalie assured him. "We can go at your pace." And so a new phase began. Regular meetings, first short and a little formal, then longer and more relaxed as everyone got used to one another. Tyler was smart, curious, with a dry sense of humor that reminded Margaret of herself. He loved music, was learning to play guitar, dreamed of studying engineering. Abigail loved music too, Margaret told him one day. She sang all the time. You must have inherited that from her. It's nice to know where it comes from, Tyler commented. I always felt different from the rest of Martha's family. Now I understand why. The visits became part of the routine. Sunday dinners at Margaret's house, where Martha often joined as well. Sewing sessions at Natalie's workshop, where Tyler showed a natural knack for handiwork. Walks in the park, conversations about everything and nothing. Slowly, carefully, a family formed. Not traditional, not simple, but real and true. Martha also became part of this new arrangement. Initially hesitant, she gradually accepted that sharing Tyler with his biological family didn't mean losing him. He seems happier, she admitted to Natalie one day. More complete now that he knows where he came from. You did an incredible job with him, Natalie said sincerely. I'm grateful for that every day. And I'm grateful that you're being so understanding, Martha replied. It could have been very different. It could have, Natalie agreed. But we chose to do it the right way for the child we both love. 6 months after their first meeting on Tyler's 16th birthday, the whole estranged family was gathered together. Margaret, Natalie, Martha, Laura and Tyler, all together around a cake that Natalie had made. Make a wish, Margaret encouraged Tyler. Tyler closed his eyes, thought for a moment, then blew out the candles. When he opened his eyes, he looked around the table at all the smiling faces. My wish already came true, he said. I have a family. A big, complicated family. But mine. To family, Margaret toasted with juice. To family, everyone repeated. And in that moment, surrounded by love and acceptance, the wounds of the past finally began to truly heal. Margaret looked at Natalie, saw the daughter she had lost and found again, saw the grandson she never knew she had, saw Martha who had saved Natalie when she needed it most, saw Laura who had raised Tyler with love. 16 years of searching, of pain, of hope. And finally, something resembling peace. Natalie still didn't have all her memories back. She probably never would. But she discovered that it didn't matter as much as she thought. She had a present rich in love, and a future full of possibilities. And Tyler, who had started life in such difficult circumstances, had not one family, but several, all united by their love for him. The golden chain that had started this entire journey still hung around Natalie's neck, but now it held a new meaning. It was no longer just a connection to a lost past, but a symbol of how love can persist through any obstacle. That night, after everyone had gone home and Margaret was alone in the house, she went to the room that had been Abigail's. For the first time in 16 years, she didn't feel that crushing weight of loss. It still hurt. It would always hurt. The lost years could never be recovered, but they had the present. And the present was precious. Margaret picked up a recent photo of everyone together and placed it on Abigail's desk, next to the old photos. Past and present, side by side. I found you, she whispered to the photo. After so long, I finally found you. And you are even stronger than I imagined. And for the first time since Abigail had disappeared, Margaret felt true hope for the future. The following months brought more healing and growth. Natalie began having more frequent flashbacks, but now she could handle them better. With the support of a therapist that Margaret insisted on paying for, she processed the memories that came back, connecting pieces of the puzzle that was her past. I remembered the day I disappeared, she told Margaret one afternoon. Not everything, but fragments. I was at the daycare helping with the children. A woman approached me, said she had an emergency and needed help. She seemed so desperate, so scared. I went with her without thinking. And then? Then everything gets hazy, Natalie admitted. I remember being in a car, feeling that something was wrong. I remember trying to get out, but my legs wouldn't respond properly. And then it's just darkness until I woke up in that clinic. Do you think you were drugged? Margaret asked, horror evident in her voice. I think so, Natalie replied. It would explain a lot. The confusion, the memory loss, how long it took me to recover. "We need to report this," Margaret said immediately. "This is kidnapping. It's something that happened 16 years ago and that we'll probably never be able to prove," Natalie gently interrupted. "Evelyn is gone. The clinic closed down. There's no evidence beyond my fragmented memories." But nothing," Natalie said firmly. "I found you. I found my son. I have a family. Seeking revenge isn't going to change the past. It's only going to steal the present I finally managed to get." Margaret wanted to protest, wanted justice for her daughter, but she saw the peace in Natalie's eyes, and she realized she was right. Sometimes moving forward was more important than looking back. Tyler was flourishing with his expanded family. He had found in Natalie a confidant who understood what it felt like to be lost, out of place. In Margaret, he found the grandmother who spoiled him, but also challenged him to be better. And Martha, with her quiet wisdom, became a source of comfort when things got complicated. "I'm the only kid at my school with 3 grandmothers," he joked one day. "And 2 moms, like, how do I explain that to people?" "You don't have to explain anything," Laura said. "Family is family, no matter what it looks like." "But it's confusing," Tyler insisted. "When I fill out forms, when teachers ask, I don't know what to say." "Then tell the truth," Natalie suggested. "That you have a big, loving family that supports you. That's all that matters." "What if people judge?" "Let them," Margaret said with a shrug. "People will always judge things they don't understand, but you know the truth. We know the truth, and that's enough." Tyler thought about it, then nodded. "You're all right," he agreed. "I'm lucky. A lot of kids barely have one family. I have many." 1 year after the initial reunion, Natalie made an important decision. "I want to go back to using my original name," she announced during a family dinner. "Not just Natalie, but Abigail Natalie. Like a bridge between who I was and who I've become." "Are you sure?" Martha asked. "Natalie is the name I gave you, the one you've used for almost 20 years. "I know," Natalie replied, taking Martha's hand, "and I'll always treasure that. Natalie is part of who I am, but Abigail is too, and I want to honor both." Abigail Natalie. Margaret tested the name. "Sounds perfect." "Sounds like you," Tyler added. "Whole." And so, with the support of the whole family, Natalie began the process of adding Abigail back to her legal name. It was symbolic, but important, a way of acknowledging her entire being, not just the part she knew. Natalie's sewing workshop also grew. With financial support from Margaret and word-of-mouth publicity from satisfied customers, she expanded into a larger space and hired 2 assistants. "I never imagined I'd be this successful," she confessed to Margaret one day while overseeing the installation of new sewing machines. "I always thought I'd just be a simple seamstress doing repairs." "You have talent," Margaret said, "and dedication. The success is deserved." "It still feels surreal sometimes," Natalie admitted, "like I'm going to wake up and find out it was all a dream." "It's not a dream," Margaret assured her. "It's real. Your life, your business, your family, all real." Tyler started helping out at the workshop in the afternoons after school. He discovered he enjoyed the meticulous work, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with his own hands. "I think I want to do this professionally," he announced one day. "Not engineering like I planned, but fashion design, creating clothes." "Are you sure?" Laura asked. "Engineering has more financial security." "But fashion design makes me happy," Tyler countered. "And isn't that what matters? Doing something we love." "He's right," Natalie supported him. "And if you need help, I'm here. We could even work together eventually." "Miller Design," Tyler joked. "That has a nice ring to it." "Or Montgomery Design," Margaret suggested with a smile. "Or both," Tyler decided. "Miller Montgomery Design, representing the whole family." It was a simple but meaningful moment. Tyler not just accepting his roots but embracing them, weaving them together into something new and his own. 2 years after the initial reunion, the family decided to take a trip together. Nothing extravagant, just a week at the beach, but it was symbolic. the first time they were all together for an extended period. On the last night of the trip, sitting around a campfire on the beach, Tyler asked a question he had been holding on to. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked. "About how things turned out, I mean. All the lost years, all the pain." Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I regret not finding Natalie sooner," she said. "I regret the years we lost, but I don't regret where it led us, because it led us here to this moment with all of us together. I regret going through all of that," Natalie added. "I regret the trauma, the pain, the memory loss. But I don't regret being found by Martha, being raised with love, becoming who I am." "And I don't regret anything," Martha said simply, "because everything I went through gave me you, Natalie, and that's worth any hardship." "I used to regret it," Laura admitted, "taking Tyler in under those questionable circumstances. But now I see that even born from a terrible situation, something good came out of it. I gained a son, and now a bigger family." Everyone looked at Tyler, waiting for his answer. "I don't regret anything," he said finally, "because everything that happened, good and bad, brought me here, and I wouldn't change that for anything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance, each lost in their own thoughts, but connected by love and shared experience. "You know what's funny?" Natalie said after a while. "It all started with a necklace, a small piece of jewelry that survived when everything else was lost." "It wasn't the necklace," Margaret corrected gently. "It was the love that made me give that necklace to you, the love that made you hold on to it even when you didn't remember why, the love that made me keep searching. It's always about love." "To love, then," Tyler toasted with his can of soda. "To love," everyone repeated. And there, under a starry sky, to the sound of waves crashing on the shore, a family born from tragedy but forged in love, celebrated not what they had lost, but what they had found. Because in the end, it didn't matter how much time had passed, how much pain had been endured. What mattered was that they were together now, and together they could face anything. The gold necklace still hung around Natalie's neck, but now it had company. Margaret had given Tyler a similar pendant for his 16th birthday, creating a new tradition, a new connection. "So, you both will always have a piece of family with you," she explained when she gave the gift. Tyler wore the pendant with pride, along with the chain Laura had given him as a child. 3 generations, 3 stories, all intertwined. Margaret knew there were still difficult days ahead. Natalie still struggled with traumatic memories. Tyler still navigated the complexity of his family situation. Laura still processed the guilt over her unwitting role in the separation. But there was also joy. So much joy. In the little things, dinners together, shared laughter, mutual support. And in the big things, celebrated achievements, reached milestones, declared love. Life would never be perfect. But it was good. And after years of darkness and uncertainty, that was more than enough. Margaret looked at her family, because that's what they were, a real family, and felt deep gratitude for the second chance she had received, for the grandson she didn't even know existed, for the strong, resilient woman her daughter had become, for Martha, who had saved Natalie when Margaret couldn't, for Laura, who had loved and raised Tyler. All the broken pieces had finally come together, not perfectly but beautifully, creating something new and precious from what had been shattered. And the golden chain, that small piece of jewelry that had survived so much, continued to shine, a constant reminder that love, true love, is never lost. It only waits, patiently, to be rediscovered. End of story. And you, dear listener, what did you think of this journey of reunion and love? Leave in the comments what you felt while following the story of Margaret, Natalie, and Tyler. Do you believe that love can overcome any obstacle? Share your experiences and emotions with us. And don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories that touch the heart.